happened largely because of the impact of the COVID pandemic and the absorption of capacity. However, there has been very significant activity on this particular issue, not least 3 weeks ago, a national week of intensification of Operation Sceptre, which is the anti-knife crime operation, which saw, I think, 2,005 arrests and well over 10,000 knives taken off the streets in the space of 1 week, which is an indicator of the scale of the problem to which we are addressing ourselves with some urgency, Mr. Speaker.
Right, we now have a substantive question to Minister Phil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I would like to group this question with questions 15, 16, 17 and 18. As the Home Secretary has already announced, we are going to embark next year on one of the biggest ever reforms of our asylum system. The system is in need of fundamental reform. The principles will be firmness and fairness. Fairness in that we will rapidly grant claims which are meritorious, but firm in the sense that where claims do not have merit, we will rapidly refuse them and make sure that you cannot have endless repeated bites of the cherry, which sadly is the case at the moment.
Let's head to Darlington with Peter Gibson. Peter Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're all rightly proud of the UK's history of being a safe haven for the persecuted. But can my honourable friend outline what steps his department is taking to ensure that claims of asylum from unsafe countries are being prioritised over those from inherently safe countries such as France?
Well, my honourable friend is quite right to raise this issue. Of course, the United Kingdom's resettlement scheme aims to take people directly from dangerous conflict zones like around Syria into the United Kingdom. We have run the biggest resettlement scheme of any country in Europe over the last 5 years. But in terms of preventing claims from safe countries, he will be aware that we've recently introduced some inadmissibility rules just a few days ago, and we are working with our French colleagues to prevent these very dangerous small boat crossings that come from France to the UK. And thanks to that work, I'm pleased to be able to report to the House that over the last 3 months in September, the number of small boat crossings per calm weather day have come down by over 60%. And that is testament to the great work being done both by UK officers but also by our colleagues in France as well.
Chris Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's immensely important that asylum seekers and refugees receive the welcome and the support they need when seeking sanctuary in the United Kingdom. But does my honourable friend agree with me that those who are rejected leave the country promptly?
Well, I agree entirely with my honourable friend. Where an asylum claim has been rejected, it is only right and fair that the person whose claim has been rejected does leave quickly. That is sadly not always the case. In fact, we're currently accommodating some thousands of failed asylum seekers at public expense, and it is right that they should leave when their asylum claim has been rejected. One of the problems we have are repeated appeals and last-minute claims that can go on almost without limitation, and we intend to legislate in the first half of next year to make sure that breakdown in process, that breakdown in the system, no longer happens.
Right, let's head down to Romsey with Caroline Noakes. Caroline Noakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The failure to manage the backlog of asylum claims has led to the Minister planning open prison-style camps in temporary accommodation in unsuitable locations remote from healthcare services. Can he explain to the residents of Bath and Stacey how the changes laid to the immigration rules last week are going to help? Or does he run the risk of establishing a separate tier of asylum seeker who cannot have their claims processed but cannot be returned to any EU country because no agreement exists to be able to do so? And does that mean that they will be permanently stuck in limbo?
Well, first of all, let me say to the Right Honourable Lady that the large numbers being accommodated are, to some degree, a consequence of COVID, because as she will know, we have largely suspended or have been running significantly lower levels of move-ons for people whose asylum claims have been decided. For example, at the moment, there are no negative cessations happening at all, and that has led to a significant increase in the number of people being accommodated. As we move out of coronavirus next year, we hope, of course, to get those numbers rapidly back down again. In relation to her question about the immigration rules, they are really laying the foundations for our post-transition period system. As the Right Honourable Lady knows, we are currently in the Dublin system, which does provide for the return of people that have claimed asylum elsewhere, for example, back to those countries, countries like France, Germany, Spain, and so on. And it is our intention to open discussions with those countries as soon as we are able to, in order to seek to bring into force similar measures after the transition period ends.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend will be aware there are approximately 60,000 people currently stuck in our asylum system. So does he therefore agree with me and my constituents in Newcastle-under-Lyme that we must get this reform through? Not only to treat them fairly, but to treat the taxpayer fairly. We shouldn't be picking up the tab for a bloated and broken system.
Well, my honourable friend puts it perfectly. It is unfair on the taxpayer to have people whose claims have been rejected still subsisting in accommodation. It is unfair also on those people with meritorious claims whose claims take longer to hear because the system is not operating in the way that it should. We certainly will be reforming it to address the issues that he is quite rightly raising, and he can look forward to supporting legislation in this House in the first half of next year to do exactly that.
Gareth Bacon.
Mr. Speaker, the law surrounding asylum is very dated and very complex. Loopholes have been exploited for many years, and as my honourable friend has stated on many occasions, tougher legislation is required. Can my honourable friend advise the House as to when this legislation will be presented?
Well, I thank my honourable friend, the member for Orpington, for that question. And as I said, we will be introducing legislation in the first half of next year. It will aim to be fair to those people with meritorious claims, to make sure they are decided quickly and they're properly looked after. But for those people who have no valid claim or who seek to bring repeated, vexatious claims, often at the last minute, to frustrate removal, we will be shutting down those avenues which are being abused to make sure the system works fairly for those who need protection but prevents abuse.
Number 19, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, we're determined to dismantle county lines. That's why we're investing £25 million over 2 years to surge our law enforcement response to these ruthless criminal gangs. This includes investment in the National County Lines Coordination Centre, targeted operational activity in 3 major exporting police force areas, and increased disruption on the road and rail network.
Brit Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With schools often having to send children home this year, there have been very vulnerable young people who have been preyed upon by these terrible gangs. Will he welcome the decision of Police and Crime Commissioner John Campion in West Mercia to commission the Children's Society to provide extra help and diversionary activities for these young people?
Well, Mr. Speaker, she is quite right to recognise, the Honourable Lady, is quite right to recognise that these gangs do prey particularly and target vulnerable children when they're outside of the school environment, and often those who sadly have fallen out of school and ceased to attend. So initiatives like the one she outlined sounds absolutely on the money, if you like, in the type of work that we need to see at a granular level in constituencies across the country. Having worked myself with the Children's Society as a backbencher, I know what enormous value and experience they can bring to these efforts, and I applaud the efforts of her Police and Crime Commissioner to do so.
We now have a substantive question to Minister Brokenshire.
The safety and security of our citizens remains our priority. We are working closely with operational partners to ensure that we are ready for a range of scenarios at the end of the transition period. We will continue to cooperate with European and international partners to tackle shared security threats.
To Scotland with Angela Crawley. Angela Crawley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police has pointed out that losing access to EU databases such as the Schengen Information System will move the average time for securing a criminal conviction from 6 days to 60 days, describing this as a capability gap and a massive impact. In the event of a no-deal Brexit, what emergency contingency plans does her department have in place until possibly replacements of the existing cross-border arrangements are agreed?
Well, I say to the Honourable Lady that national security remains our absolute priority, and this country is a safe country and will remain so after the end of the transition period. She asks what alternative arrangements are in place. Obviously, we continue the negotiations and we obviously await the outcome of that, but are prepared for a range of scenarios. And in the event that it's not possible to reach an agreement, the UK has well-developed and well-rehearsed plans in place. These involve transitioning in cooperation with EU member states to alternative non-EU arrangements by the end of the transition period. These are tried and trusted mechanisms which the UK already uses with so many other countries.
Shadow Minister Conor Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister recently wrote to me to tell me that in the event of no deal on policing and security cooperation, the UK would fall back on non-EU arrangements. Does he agree with the former National Security Advisor's comments this weekend that these fallbacks are all slower and more clunky and they would leave us all less safe? And when the current head of UK counter-terrorism policing said we need an agreement that retains or improves levels of cooperation, can he promise the police, the security service and most importantly the British public that this government will deliver precisely that?
Well, I've already said, Mr. Speaker, that this country will remain one of the safest places in the world. And I think it's worth underlining to the honourable gentleman that the UK will continue to be a global leader on national security. We are now and we will remain in the future. And I hope that he will equally note the level of preparedness, the hard work that has gone in by our police and all of our other agencies to ensure that we are well prepared for the end of the transition period, to give that assurance to the public over the safety and security and their welfare and well-being, which absolutely remains a priority for this government.
Number 22, please.
Mr. Speaker, before I answer the question, can I apologise to you and to the House for having used the word granular in my previous answer? If it's not unparliamentary language, it ought to be. Mr. Speaker, the government response to the call for evidence on violence and abuse towards shop workers was published in July. We are working with retailers on a programme of work to drive down this crime. We're developing communications materials to give the message that abuse is not tolerated, encouraging retailers to report these crimes and provide better support to victims.
Like many colleagues, I support our store's Freedom from Fear campaign and recently visited and met staff at my local co-op, and I was astonished to hear that across the 12 stores in Cambridge there are some 3,000 incidents reported already this year. That's an incident in every store every day. So how much worse does it have to get before the police take this more seriously and the government takes some action?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I join with the honourable gentleman in being appalled at the level of abuse that shop workers and indeed violence that shop workers often face. And we are doing a huge amount to try and deal with it. Along with the Retail Crime Steering Group, we are working closely with police forces to, if you like, press down on this particular issue, and I have written to all chief constables in recent months outlining to them the need to make sure that every crime that takes place in a shop is investigated as much as it possibly can be. And interestingly, just last week I met with the head of security at the co-op to talk about the work they're doing with a company called FaceWatch, Mr. Speaker, which is using facial recognition technology to alert staff to repeat offenders who are entering the store, allowing them to intervene at a stage in the interaction before it's likely to become violent and abusive.
Right, we come to Shadow Minister Bambosher.
Speaker, in a recent survey of their members, the Shop Workers Trade Union Asdor found that 85% had been verbally abused, 57% had been threatened, and 9% had been assaulted this year. Now, given these shocking statistics and noting the unsung role that these retail staff have played in ensuring that shops remain open during the pandemic, does the Minister agree with me that they need greater protection? And does he support my honourable friend, the member for Nottingham North's Private Members Bill, which seeks to create new offences for assaults on retail workers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do agree with the honourable gentleman that shop workers deserve all the protection that we can afford to them in the conduct of their duty, which has never been more crucial than during the recent pandemic and the lockdown, where we saw the critical part they play in making sure that the nation is fed in particular. Having said that, we don't yet see the case for a specific offence of assault on a shop worker, notwithstanding the fact that there is already an aggravating factor in sentencing for somebody convicted of an assault upon somebody performing a public service into which those kind of workers would fall. The Sentencing Council is, however, I gather, shortly to begin their work in reviewing the sentencing of assault, and I've urged the honourable member, with whom I've discussed these matters many times now, to put his evidence into that consultation, as will the government, to make sure that those who do assault those working in a retail environment receive a commensurately serious offence, such that others will be deterred from doing the same.
We now have a substantive question to Minister Atkins from Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I'd like to group this question with questions 25 and 26. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, we have provided unprecedented additional funding to domestic abuse service providers to bolster their capacity to meet the demand for support. We announced further funding last month and also relaunched the #YouAreNotAlone campaign to ensure that victims of abuse and those worried about them know how to access help and advice. In addition, police continue to target perpetrators of abuse proactively because there is no excuse for abuse.
Let's head up to Luton North with Sarah Owens. Sarah Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know domestic abuse helplines have seen a significant increase in calls for help this year, especially during lockdowns. But we also know that there are many people who struggle to access domestic abuse support even before the pandemic. Hearing from local campaigners such as Dr. Nazia Khanum in Luton, people just aren't getting the support needed because of additional barriers such as finances, language, culture, and having no recourse to public funds. What is the government doing to ensure domestic abuse support gets to those who are hardest to reach?
Well, the Honourable Lady will be aware, of course, of the groundbreaking domestic abuse bill that has passed its scrutiny in the House of Commons and awaits its scrutiny in the House of Lords. As part of that bill, we have an extensive programme of work, not just in the bill itself, but outside of the bill, to help support victims. And she will, I hope, know that not only have we commissioned the designate Domestic Abuse Commissioner to map the services that are available in the community, but also that we are in the process of launching our Support for Migrant Victims scheme, which is a pilot scheme to support those victims of domestic abuse who have no recourse to public funds.
Alex Norris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister was wise to make that extra funding available in light of the impact of COVID on domestic abuse and sexual violence. However, that money has to be spent through Police and Crime Commissioners' offices by support services by March. And those support services I've talked to have said that's simply not enough time to spend it efficiently and effectively. Will the Minister commit today to give them another year to spend that same money?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for raising a constructive point. He knows, I hope, that we were very keen through the pandemic to help at local, regional and national level. And indeed, I was very, very careful to ensure that police and crime commissioners who are responsible for distributing the local level of funding do so not just to those services that are commissioned, but also to non-commissioned services, because there is a wealth of expertise across the country. In terms of the funding point, I will, of course, take that away. It is something I've been discussing with charities, and I know their concerns, and it's something that we're dealing with during the spending review allocation process.
David Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Reducing the risk supports victims of domestic abuse in my constituency and across Oxfordshire, and they were grateful to receive some of the funding that you refer to, the honourable friend refers to, which has helped them support 50% more people. One of the things they focus on is prevention, and does my honourable friend agree with me that whilst we have to deal with the cases we've seen the spike in this year, we mustn't lose sight of the importance of prevention so they don't get to that stage in the first place?
I very much recognise that, and indeed part of the programme of work that sits within the bill but also outside of the bill is about tackling those who perpetrate domestic abuse. You know, we need to stop these cycles of abuse where sadly in some cases perpetrators go from relationship to relationship, abusing and hurting people in their wake. And so one of the things I'm very interested in, I know it's an interest of my honourable friends, is looking at what more we can do to understand the work of academics, in particular interesting areas such as the use of AI to see if we're able to do better by way of risk assessing domestic abuse perpetrators and the terrible, terrible impacts they can have on their victims.
Send up to Birmingham to Shadow Minister Jess Phillips. Jess Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Merry Christmas. The ONS and Women's Aid data last week revealed that 4,823 victims of domestic abuse were not given refuge in 2018-19 because of a lack of space. This is an increase of 1,200 victims left without a safe place than the previous year. The government may cite the temporary increase in beds hard won by campaigners over the COVID-19 crisis, but both she and I know that support services should be for life, not just for COVID. I, Mr. Speaker, have tried and failed to get refuge beds for victims over the last few weeks. I simply ask the Minister if she is proud of a record of a rising number of victims turned away from life-saving support, and can she guarantee that next year these figures will fall, or will it rise to 5, maybe 6,000 victims turned away?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her support in the bill, because as she knows, the introduction of Part 4 of the bill puts particular duties on Tier 1 local authorities to provide support services as part of their package of care towards people who are having to live in safe accommodation and refuge spaces. But I think also we need to focus not just on refuge spaces, those are absolutely critical, but as part of our work in the future, I very much want us to be focusing on trying to keep where safe victims and children in their homes and perpetrators being required to leave their home addresses. It is simply unacceptable that someone who has suffered trauma for years and years feels in moments of crisis that they must be the ones to leave their home, their family, their friends, their GPs, their schools, and the perpetrator gets to stay in the home address. That is wrong, and wherever it is safe and possible to do so, we want to change that culture.
Curran-Buck.
Number 28, sir.
Mr. Speaker, may I group, please, this question with questions 29 and 30. We are determined to tackle the harm caused by county lines exploitation. In addition to the establishment of violence reduction units, the extensive operations conducted by British Transport Police on transport networks and other targeted policing across the country, we have significantly increased our investment this year in one-to-one specialist support for county lines victims and their families to help them leave the clutches of these criminal gangs. We are also funding the helpline Safe Call, which is run by the Missing People charity, which provides specialist advice and support to young people, parents and professionals who are worried about a young person who may be in trouble and being exploited.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. In my constituency, there is one estate where it is believed that at least 20 county lines are being run. We have had a spate of killings this year, including 2 teenagers, one of whom died only a few weeks ago. Does the Minister think that the loss of over a third of our police services, 80% of our youth services, and the halving of our early intervention services have helped or hindered in dealing with county lines? Minister.
Well, I think we should be clear that the fault for those terrible, terrible facts that she has just described in an estate in her constituency lie at the hands of the criminal gangs who are exploiting our children and peddling drugs. It is that demand for those illegal substances that is driving this market force of county line gangs across the country. Now, she will, I'm sure, be delighted about the recruitment of extra officers to the Met. She will also, I'm sure, be pleased about the targeted investment we are putting into one-to-one specialist support for children and young people, including in London. But the message is clear. It is criminal gangs who are responsible for this, and we need to work together to drive them out.
Capri.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Children in my constituency are also getting unwittingly or unwillingly ensnared by gangs and exploited by them, not only into county lines, but other criminal activity. And this has a huge impact on them and on their families. And in response to this trend, groups such as Action Isleworth Mothers in my constituency have been set up by parents to support other parents and their children who are at risk. Can the Minister tell me what additional support and funding the government will provide to grassroots groups such as AIM?
Well, I really welcome the sort of intervention the Honourable Lady has described, and I'm very, very conscious of the impact that criminal lines exploitations, but other types of criminal exploitation, as she's described, has not just on the young people themselves, but on their families and their wider neighbourhoods. In terms of the organisation, I'm very happy to meet her to learn more about it, but I would remind her of the Youth Endowment Fund, which is a fund of £200 million, which we set out over a 10-year period in order to research programmes that work and have the best, are evaluated to have really, really good developments and really good conclusions, so that we can then share that best practice with other local authorities and charities across the country.
In a recent report, the Children's Commissioner highlighted the risk that young people in care were put in when they go into unregulated and mostly unsupported accommodation. And was calling for a ban on that. One of the things that they're at risk of is being preyed upon and drawn into county lines activity. Will she speak to her colleagues in the education, work and pensions and housing departments and see whether they can support my bill which aims to outlaw this?
Very much. I hope the Honourable Lady will be content to know that those discussions are already taking place. I take the vulnerabilities of children living in care very, very seriously. Indeed, one of the funds she may be aware of, building a Trusted Relationships Fund, is precisely to help children who have perhaps been let down by every adult that if they've come across in their lives. And I've seen firsthand some of the incredible work that the youth workers through that fund are able to do with individuals. But certainly happy to meet her and certainly happy to discuss her bill with my colleagues.
Well, we're now going to topicals with Ben Everett. Tell them all.
Topical one, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Windrush generation helped build the Britain we know and love today. The Windrush compensation scheme is a key part of our efforts to right the wrongs they endured. Today I'm announcing substantial changes to the compensation scheme, so those eligible will receive more compensation and more quickly. I'm increasing the minimum payments for the impact of life to £10,000, with payments starting this week. I'm raising the bar on the amount someone can claim for their impact on their life to £100,000, with exceptional cases able to receive more. These changes, Mr. Speaker, under the terms of the scheme will apply retrospectively and together will make a real difference to people's lives. I've always promised to listen and act to ensure that the victims of Windrush should receive the maximum amount of compensation they deserve. And it is my mission to correct the wrongs of the past, and I will continue to work with the Windrush Working Group to do exactly that.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, at this time of year, there's only one person that we want sneaking into our houses, and he wears a red suit. So perhaps the Home Secretary will join us in congratulating Thames Valley Police for their recent Operation View, a week-long anti-burglary operation which resulted in 88 arrests, meaning Father Christmas has a longer naughty list, but the homes of Milton Keynes and the rest of the Thames Valley are safer this festive season.
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and he will know the strength of support that I have for Thames Valley Police Force in particular, and the exceptional work that they have done, and they do. I'd like to commend them for their work, particularly on burglary. And of course, I want to wish everybody, Mr. Speaker, a happy Christmas, and actually a safe and secure Christmas for everybody and all British members of the public.
Home Secretary Nick Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to open by thanking the many neighbourhood police officers who did so much work last month visiting schools in support of the vital message of Anti-Bullying Week. And I'm sure all members of the House would agree with that message and teaching the importance of upholding those values. Yet we have a Home Secretary in office who's been found to have broken the ministerial code by bullying. What signal does the Home Secretary think that sends to victims of bullying all around the country as to whether they should come forward?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, first of all, as the House will know, I've already made an apology to those that I've inadvertently upset. And I've also made it clear, Mr. Speaker, that I'm now getting on and delivering on the people's priorities.
Thomas Simmons.
Speaker, the truth is that the whole episode shows a government that's lost sight of its moral compass. The Prime Minister's former distinguished advisor on ethics, Sir Alex Allen, found the Home Secretary had breached the ministerial code for the second time, yet he's the one who loses his job. It sends out the most terrible signal to victims in workplaces and schools around the country. And let's be clear, this has happened in the context of chronic failure. Violent crime rocketing across the country, conviction rates at record lows, domestic abuse charities struggling to keep their doors open, and it's taken 2.5 years for the government to consider any meaningful action on the offensive mess that is the Windrush compensation scheme. Isn't the truth under this government? It's one rule for the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary and their friends, but another for everybody else.
Mr. Speaker, let me just say to the honourable gentleman, he can carry on with his belittling personal attacks, which will actually make me more determined than ever to deliver on the issues that I am focused on, and also the issues of people's priorities. The honourable gentleman would like to hear my response. The people's priorities that got this government elected a year ago, to deliver on 20,000 more police officers, to deliver on the immigration changes that his party still implacably opposes. And also, if I may say so, Mr. Speaker, let's not forget about the victims of the Windrush compensation scheme. As he will also know, the scandal of Windrush dates back many successive decades under many other governments. It is this government that is fixing the wrongs of the Windrush issue, but also delivering in terms of compensation to the victims and also ensuring that more victims of that scheme come forward. And that is something, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable gentleman has heard in my opening remarks today, I will continue to pursue. We will learn the lessons of the past, and at the same time we will continue to work with everybody across the Windrush Task Force to make sure wrongs of the past are absolutely righted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend know when the party opposite decided to stop standing up for convicted criminals like murderers and rapists that this government is trying to deport, rather than the victims of crime and the law-abiding members of the British public?
Well, my friend is absolutely right. And once upon a time, Mr. Speaker, the party opposite claimed that it was tough on crime and the causes of crime. But quite frankly, it is quite disgraceful, and I'm sure his postbag has mirrored my postbag over recent weeks as well, where the British public are absolutely shocked and appalled that the party opposite now stand up for the murderers, the rapists, the sex offenders, and absolutely are not doing the right thing when it comes to ensuring that foreign national offenders are removed from our country. This party is a party of law and order, and we will continue to do the right thing and keep the British public safe. And I'm sorry that the honourable gentleman opposite finds that funny and has to laugh at that.
We now go to the Chair of the Select Committee, Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the Windrush announcement? We will look forward to seeing the detail. But last week, the NAO report said that the Home Office planned to remove all SIS2 data from the Warnings Index, Semaphore and Border Crossing systems on the 31st of December. Can the Home Secretary confirm that that means the government will be removing or deleting the details of over 40,000 criminals and suspects wanted for abroad from our border systems?
Minister.
I would say to the Chair of the Select Committee, and she highlights the issue of the ability to share data with our international partners. Obviously, our Interpol relationship predates our SIS2 access, and that will provide us with the means to communicate with all of our international partners quickly and securely. All incoming Interpol circulations, notices and diffusions as they're called, are uploaded to UK border and policing systems to assure our security.
John Mullen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe the Immigration Minister recently met with members of the National Farmers Union of Scotland to discuss the labour needs of Scotland's farmers. Can the Home Secretary provide an update to the House on the seasonal worker scheme for 2021?
Home Secretary.
Well, my friend is absolutely right. The Minister did absolutely have meetings, and he will also understand that the government, rightly so, is looking at and reviewing the needs of the agricultural sector, the seasonal agriculture's workers pilot, which him and many other colleagues have made representations on. And the Immigration Minister and myself are working across government right now to meet those needs while getting that balance right of future employment opportunities for British workers in our country.
Right, let us add to Scotland with Stuart C. MacDonald. Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As alluded to earlier, the Home Office has just made some extraordinary immigration rule changes, completely at odds with the Refugee Convention, and which could see almost every asylum seeker in the UK left in limbo or removed to a country they've never even been near. So why won't someone in the department have the courage to make a full statement to the House so that MPs can properly scrutinise these drastic changes before they come into force in January?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely right that we have made changes to our immigration rules, and he will specifically know, and I hope he recognises, that when it comes to illegal migrations and the issues that we face, too many people are putting their lives at risk, crossing the channel in unseaworthy vessels, and not only are they putting their lives at risk, they put the lives of Border Force officers at risk as well, and we are determined to make that route unviable, and as a result, these rule changes are a part of that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the last few months, there's been a spate of vehicle thefts across the High Peak, including in Glossop, Hadfield, Chapel-on-the-Frith and New Mills. I'm grateful to Inspector Dave Parker and the local police for their proactive efforts to tackle this problem, but more resources are needed. I was proud to stand on a manifesto promising to recruit an additional 20,000 police officers. Can the Home Secretary assure me that Derbyshire will get its fair share of those extra officers as soon as possible?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise his concerns. And actually, he's raised the issue about crime and the implications, obviously, of disorder for his local community. He is right, and I can confirm that his police force have recruited 72 additional police officers. Of course, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that number is going to go up and up and up, in line with, sorry, Mr. Speaker, in line with our commitment to recruit 20,000 more police officers.
We have 9, 10, 11 all withdrawn, so I'm going to go straight to Jack Brereton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend agree to consider the reclassification of psychoactive substances such as monkey dust, which have had such a damaging effect on our lives, and communities in Stoke-on-Trent?
Home Secretary.
My honourable friend is absolutely right to point to and highlight the devastating impact of such drugs and monkey dust, and I have obviously visited his constituents in the past and we've discussed these issues. The government recognises absolutely the corrosive harm that these drugs provide, and of course there are penalties for supplying these drugs. The penalties up to 14 years in prison and also unlimited fines. At this moment we are keeping drug classification under review, and of course we do that taking account all the harms and the impact of these drugs upon individuals and our communities.
Alex Davies-John.
Diolch, Mr. Speaker. Now, I welcome the government's recent funding commitment to extend the work across England and Wales to manage and change the behaviour of abusive perpetrators. Yet I note with concern that these funds have to be spent by March 2021. Now, this clearly doesn't leave much time to introduce the vital measures that are desperately needed to end domestic abuse. And as the Minister herself alluded to today, it is vitally important that we reach perpetrators before they have a chance to abuse again. So what plans does the government have to keep holding the perpetrators' feet to the fire with projects for the long term?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for highlighting that investment. She makes a point about the time frame in which that money was granted by the Treasury, but this is a programme of work that we are taking forward throughout the next few years. She'll understand that there are spending review allocation decisions to be made at the moment, but we are clear that we want to continue tackling this abusive behaviour.
Kevin Hollingray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The new emergency services network, which has been delivered by EE, is clearly vital for our emergency services, but also for the improvement of mobile phone services in rural areas. But it is well behind schedule and way over budget. Is there anything the Home Secretary can do to bring that back on track?
Well, my friend, Mr. Speaker, is absolutely right. This programme is incredibly late on delivery and well over budget. And rightly so. In fact, this House has given this programme a great deal of scrutiny, and rightly so. And there's no apology for that. And, you know, the failings are on the record. So we're now working at pace, clearly, to deliver on this. This is a really, really important programme. And the Police Minister and others are working with police forces now to get this plan implemented. We want this to work. And as my honourable friend has highlighted, I'm afraid too much time has passed, too much money has been lost and wasted. This is a classic example of sort of procurement and big projects not working. We've got to fix this and sort this out.
Let's head up to Barnsley with Dan Jarvis. Dan Jarvis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this month, 8 Commonwealth-born British Army veterans lost their legal battle to remain in the UK leaving the men in fear of destitution and deportation. The Home Secretary has the power to end their ordeal. So will she now commit to granting the veterans the right to stay in the country they so bravely fought for?
The honourable gentleman is absolutely right, and I pay tribute to those individuals.